very much. Hello, everyone. So I wasn't here yesterday. I apologize for that. I was at another conference on climate change. So forgive me. I'm going to refer to my notes and read some of the things I've written. That's my disclaimer out of the way. When Leon asked me to speak about RDP housing, I didn't want to be superficial about it, but at the same time, I really can't do justice to the writings of Martin and Leon, who sit and think about these issues quite deeply and thoroughly. So I've decided to give you my perspective. As a pro bono lawyer, I work in the poorest of poor communities, Soweto, Alex, Eldorado Park, Diepsloot, the inner city, CBD. And so my perspective and my insights come from having to sit with a client in front of me and have to give them advice on their problem. And somewhere in that problem is an RDP house. Shout. Okay. Is an RDP house that needs to be resolved there. So, I need the clicker. So let us begin. If I cover anything that was done yesterday, please forgive me as well. Yeah.
The big green one.
There we go. All right. So very quickly, we all know in 1994, former President Nelson Mandela introduced this wonderful RDP plan, and he had 6 pillars or objectives. It had to be an integrated plan working with all levels of government. It had to be a people-driven process, which means it must serve the needs of the people. It must promote peace and security. It must be nation building. It must be an integrated process.
Excuse me, Candice. Can we have the volume there? People are asking for volume on the mic.
Integrated process. In dealing with reconstruction and development, and finally it must promote democracy in that the people's voice must be heard. They must be part of the decision-making process. So 2 of the main reforms that was introduced was that of land reform and housing. And land reform was based on 2 tenets. The first one was redistribution of land. Those who need it but cannot afford it. And the second one was restitution of land. Those who had it but lost it, it was taken away through apartheid legislation. Then, of course, the housing. The need for housing was homelessness. So the 2 pillars of housing was to build low-cost housing for poor people and to renovate existing buildings. And we've seen a lot of that taking place in the CBD area. But then we all know that the wheels came off the RDP process, and some of the criticisms against this has been there was a mismanagement of funds, corruption within the department, there's shoddy workmanship, there was the buildings were not in the city centres close to the urban areas. It was actually very far away from amenities, causing greater hardship for travelling for the owners. The houses fell into disrepair and people could not maintain them. There is a backlog to issuing of title deeds still in the Department of Housing. There was a lot of informal sales taking place, and finally there was just widespread corruption in the Department of Housing. So people were thinking of a lot of solutions. So when we looked at it, we had what I call the ecosystem solution. A lot of sociologists, social anthropologists says, RDP has failed because you didn't build an ecosystem around the individual. This integrated plan was supposed to involve all levels of government. So you take the impoverished individual, you involve the Department of Housing, you give him a house, Department of Labor, you give him a job or a work program, Department of Education, you give his children schooling, Department of Health. So the entire program was supposed to have been built, again, around the targeted individual. Then we had a lot of economists also commenting on this and saying, no. The problem with the RDP housing program is that we gave them a house, but we did not teach them to fish. So they had a house, but they had nothing else. And that's all well and good. Their recommendations was that you had to then teach them, give them skills, teach them about entrepreneurship, build an economy around the individual. Then we had lots of engineers and architects who came back and said RDP has failed because government should have started with technology and innovation right from the start. There was an opportunity that we failed to build green houses. We were supposed to use solar energy. We were supposed to teach people to embrace this green economy. And then finally, we have the financiers who came up and said, well, people are poor. They don't have money. And if they don't have money, they're not going to appreciate anything they get for free. So they must pay for it. And you know what? People have pension funds. So let's use their pension funds as security against these housing loans. And they were all great solutions. But this is what our government came up with. You can tell I do love them. They came up with the preemptive rights clause. And that was done through the Housing Amendment Act, and it was effective on 1 February 2002, and it is set out in Section 10A and 10B of the Housing Act of 1997. So we all know that a preemptive right is a privilege given, awarded to a certain class of persons, a right of preference, so to speak. But in this case, Section 10 sets out what I call the returns and exchange policy. So it basically says that an owner may not sell or alienate an RDP dwelling for a period of 8 years from the date on which the property was acquired, unless it is first offered to the relevant provincial housing department. And then the housing department must endorse his records and put the applicant back onto the waiting list. Right? The provincial department then will be deemed to be the owners of the house, and there's no purchase price payable. So, return and exchange, you get something else out of it. But this is very problematic. The houses are still being sold. No one cares about the preemptive clause. These sales are cash sales. So they're not looking at market value, because what are they really giving? They're just giving 4 walls and a roof. They're not giving any right. They're not giving security of tenure. And there's no action taken against buyers or sellers. The conundrum that the Department of Housing faces is, where do we find all of these people? So then we go to Section 10B. And I say this is the impact on one's estate. 10B says that it is a condition of this housing subsidy that a house may not be sold or alienated by a successor in title or by creditors unless it is first offered to the provincial housing department at the same value of the housing subsidy. So basically, if an owner dies, the house does not fall into one's estate. It must be given back to the Department of Housing, and they'll be paid back the original subsidy. Or the owner can just go and amass a whole lot of debt from Edgar's and Jet and Fushini's, and the creditor, the judgment creditor, can just sell the house back to the Department of Housing for the subsidy value to offset that debt. Secondly, it grants exemptions. It says we're giving ourselves the power to exempt, grant exemptions to our right of, our preemptive right to take back the property. So that's also problematic for me as a pro bono lawyer. 8 years is a very long time to wait, especially when you don't have title deeds and no security of tenure. So what happens if a person dies? That's it. There's no house. There's nothing that you leave. It doesn't fall into the estate of the deceased person. It is then returned, so the heirs become homeless. Did that solve any problem that the government wanted to solve? No. It can also be sold in execution. That makes a person in their own lifetime become homeless. If you are married and you get divorced, try figuring out how to split that RDP house. One of those spouses is homeless. So these are the problems that we are actually facing, practical problems that we are facing with this preemptive clause. So then I have and my perspective comes from the right to self-determination. And that's what I I believe that we should be. It's not an ecosystem. It's us as individuals choosing our right to do our own thing. So I believe that, number one, that the RDP housing and the preemptive clause is a violation of our constitutional rights. It violates our rights to equality. We're not treated equally. A private landowner has a different class of rights to an RDP landowner. There's no equal protection. Try going to court and saying I own an RDP house with no title deed. It is discriminatory. To me, it is based on the premise that prehistorically disadvantaged people and poor people have to be protected, so decisions must be made for them, that they can't decide what they want, what they can do with their own property. You know, the minister once said that we must protect these houses. These houses must never be sold because people will just take the money and waste it. So what if they do? It's theirs. It's there. We all do it. We waste our own money. Let poor people waste their money too. In a free and democratic society, we all have the right to self-determination. And this clause gives neither dignity nor freedom or the right to make decisions over one's own property. There's no security of tenure. That's it. You live there, you can be hijacked, you can be evicted, you can arrive at your house, there's another person living there. Some people, 20 years later, are still on that waiting list. They've never received their house. So where does the security come from that was promised? So, as lawyers, we'll try and look for judges who agree with us. So there was a case that was decided in February this year called the Endemeni Civic Association and others versus the local municipality. This was a classic case where the municipality was as corrupt as you can get in the RDP housing scheme. And the applicant was a civil society organization that was trying to help the poor apply for houses. And the judge in the KZN High Court agreed with me and said the arbitrary application and manipulation of the RDP housing waiting lists, the allocation of housing policies, and the corruption that took place was a violation of sections 1, 9, 10, 25, 26, 33, 41, and 195 of the Constitution. It said that not only is it unconstitutional, it violates the rule of law. And in addition, all of the allocations made were set aside because it violated the Promotion of Administration of Justice Act. So in conclusion, as a piece of social engineering, I feel that the RDP has failed. Statistics show that 4 out of 10 people, 10 applicants, are still staying in the house. That means only 40% of people who applied for houses actually needed housing. 60% didn't need housing. They just wanted an economic opportunity, and that's what they've done. As empowerment, did it empower people? Of course, they translated it to cash, and they did something else with it. But it didn't solve homelessness. It didn't solve poverty. So, the poor has remained poor. What are my solutions to that? I want to change the narrative. And how do I do that? I would like to remove the preemptive clause. It serves no purpose. Nobody cares. It's there. The houses are still being sold. Nobody's being punished. Nobody's going to jail. That's how. So why have it then? Secondly, coming back to what everyone's been saying today, we need to title these houses. Who do we title? We title the people who are actually living in those houses. So people who applied and are living, that 40%. We title the people who bought the houses, whether legal or illegal. It was really the intention of the parties to transfer ownership. So give them, make the factual situation be reflected in the legal situation. And finally, title the people who still exercise control over those houses, the landlords that are using the RDP house as a means of earning an income. What is left over are the houses that are hijacked, the houses that are abandoned, that has illegal occupiers, and with those houses, then you can say, okay, we're now giving an option to clean up this mess to people who want to buy these houses. That's my solution, because at the end of the day, I feel people who live in RDP houses are there because they need a place to live. They may not be the intended beneficiaries of the RDP program, but they are the ones in need of the RDP house. Thank you.
Wait here 2 seconds.